A Diwali bonanza for Indians in the Indian diaspora as Rishi Sunak becomes the first British Britishman of Indian heritage to actually take the top job at Downing Street. I'm Barkha Dutt, you're with the Mojo story. And we are looking today at the rise of a Rishi Sunak. Those images coming out of London have, in fact, grabbed and made global headlines. Rishi Sunak has met with King Charles. And as I said, in India at least, the feeling is there's a Desi at Downing Street. But is that really the case? Mr. Sunak's parents actually came from Africa to the United Kingdom, though he has described himself as someone who's proudly British and proudly Hindu. He is, of course, married to the daughter of Infosys co-founder Narayan Murthy, and to that extent has a live and present India connection as well. No matter which way you look at it, this is an extremely significant moment, a moment of history, whether you like Rishi Sunak, you don't, you have disagreements with the Tories, you don't, you like his politics, you don't, you're cynical about what it'll really mean for the India-UK relation. No matter which way you cut and dice it, this is history in the making. But what does it really mean? And how should we really decode this moment, the exit of Liz Truss and the ascent of Rishi Sunak? Let's introduce our guests on the program today, a very distinguished panel. We're joined by Ed Luce. Ed is an old friend of India, but of course now is with the Financial Times. He was always with the FT, but now an associate editor with the Financial Times based out of the US. Good to see you, Ed. Also joining us is Geeta Guru-Murthy, who's a presenter with BBC World. Geeta, on her Twitter timeline, first forecast there would be an uh, Indian origin UK Prime Minister before Diwali, and it happened exactly on Diwali. Ambassador Navtej Sarna, man of many parts, of course, a veteran diplomat who's also been India's High Commissioner to the United Kingdom, but also the author of a number of books on, in some ways, the tortured colonial history of India and our tryst with colonialism, which is why, in so many ways, this moment has a kind of different symbolism for us here in India. Also, very pleased to welcome to the program Lord Karan, one of the most distinguished British Indian citizens of the United Kingdom. Again, a man of many parts, the founder of Cobra Beer, also the Chancellor of the University of Birmingham, and of course, a cross-bench independent peer. Good to see you, Karan. And also joining us is Pranav Bhanot, a young member, lawyer, and councillor of the Conservative Party and the author of an upcoming book on Rishi Sunak. So really a great panel there. And let me start with you, Lord Karan Bilimoria, if I may. How do you see the significance of this moment? The cynics are saying it's being over romanticized, that, Rishi's made it a second time lucky and only because Boris Johnson withdrew. Others are saying you cannot in any ways undermine, no matter, as I said, what happens next, the import of this moment. What would you say?
In 2002, I was privileged to be awarded Asian of the Year, and it was presented to me by the then Home Secretary, David Blunkett, now Lord Blunkett. And I remember saying in my acceptance speech then that in my lifetime, we would see an Asian as Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. Well, it's taken 20 years to get there, and we now not only have an Asian, we have a South Asian, we have an Indian origin individual who is now Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. I mean, this is wonderful news. There are 1.5 million Indians in the United Kingdom. It's the largest ethnic minority community in the UK, and I can proudly say the most successful, whether it's in business, whether it's in politics, and now all the way to the top to becoming Prime Minister. And to think that when I came over to the UK as a student, as a 19-year-old in the 1980s, as a scholar, I was a Tata scholar, I came to study as an impoverished student, and at that time, I was told by my family and friends in India, if you decide to stay on and work after your studies in the UK, you will never get to the top because you will not be allowed to get to the top because as a foreigner, there will be a glass ceiling. And you know what? They were absolutely right at that time, sadly. But now they would be absolutely wrong. In front of my eyes, I've seen that glass ceiling completely shattered. And I think the United Kingdom is now a country where anyone can get anywhere, regardless of race, religion, or background. And Rishi Sunak is a perfect example of it. I mean, I'm the first ethnic minority president of the Confederation of British Industry, the equivalent of the CII in India. I'm the first Indian-born chancellor of a Russell Group university in the UK, the University of Birmingham. I've created a household name, a brand of beer, Cobra, that is, I would argue, the most famous Indian consumer brand in the UK. And this country has allowed me to do all that, given me the opportunity to do all that. And I think it's something to be celebrated and something I'm very proud of.
And can I ask you briefly, as somebody who, as you said, did struggle, did encounter that racism, was somebody who was born in India and then made it big in Britain, how alive was racism and how much has changed? I mean, how much of it is the end of that sort of racism with this moment of Rishi Sunak's rise, Karan?
Well, we've got to look at this as progress that's been made. If you look at Parliament, when I was at Cambridge in the 1980s, we had a big celebration in 1987 because the first 4 ethnic minority MPs after the war were elected to the House of Commons, and there was 1 in the House of Lords. So there were 5 ethnic minority members of Parliament in 1987. 25 years later, we had a photograph on the steps of Westminster Hall. By then, I joined the House of Lords. I've been there for 16 years. On that photograph, we had 69 ethnic minority members of the House of Lords and House of Commons. Fast forward to 2019, after Boris Johnson's victory, we had another photograph with Rishi Sunak there, Preeti Patel, 100 ethnic minority House of Lords and House of Commons. You do the sums, 100 out of 650 MPs and around 800 Lords is only half the proportion of ethnic minorities in the population in the UK. So we're only halfway there, but we're making phenomenal progress from 5 in 1987 to over 100 today.
Well, as I said in my introduction, Geeta, no matter which side of the political divide you are, I've been watching British telly, and even sort of Labour sort of representatives are saying this is a big moment, especially those who from the South Asian diaspora. And you forecasted almost, you weren't quite sure because British politics has been so crazy in such a sort of, gone to hell and back kind of phase. And you're from the diaspora yourself. Personally for you, what does this moment signify? There's so many people of my generation and younger, friends in England, who are saying their parents never believed that such a moment would be possible. So I'm just wondering what you're picking up in the community, Geeta. Give me a second, Geeta. Let me just go ahead.
I think it is a really big moment. And I think regardless of politics, whether you're a Conservative or whether you absolutely are opposed to the Conservatives, whether you back what Rishi Sunak is doing or you are miles away, this is a really important place that we're in. And I just want to pick up on what Karan said, because I think it's really important to say that obviously Sunak has had a fantastic education. He has had a lot of wealth. Some of it he's created, some of it he married into a, obviously enormously wealthy family. And I think what some are observing is that if you haven't had those advantages in this country, you are still struggling. And I think the Met Police here, various cricket organisations, a lot of institutions still have been called out right now this year for institutional racism. So I think to say that this is a completely meritocratic, egalitarian society is not correct. But at the same time, it is a credit to Rishi Sunak and his family and everyone who supported him, and a credit to the UK that this has happened. And I think we have seen that it was probably going to be possible for the last decade. And in fact, David Cameron also, I think, when in a meeting with Narendra Modi, welcoming Mr. Modi here a few years ago, said he thought also that it was only a matter of time before we would get an Asian Prime Minister. And David Cameron, to be fair, took positive action to try and make that happen by bringing more people into the Conservative Party. I think overall, though, again, there's a different generational response. My parents' generation, of course, who do remember all those signs when they first came to London of no Asians, no blacks, had sort of raw first-hand racism right in front of them. For them, this is an incredible moment. For my generation, we have seen people come up through all avenues of public life and private enterprise here in this country. And for my children, I just asked them today whether any of their friends mentioned it. They went to a Diwali party last night at university, and they said, actually, people are not so surprised. They have grown up, they're in their early teens. They don't feel as yet, thankfully, that they have faced any barriers. And so for them, it's almost quite normal. So generationally, you're seeing different responses.
Well, we did also have the incident of a phone, a caller who dialed in onto one of the sort of podcasts. Geeta, you'll be familiar with this, and actually insisted that Rishi Sunak was not actually from Britain. So maybe generationally it's shifting, but you make the very important point about class and privilege and elitism, and I think Ed's been making that point in his writings. But I just want to bring in Navtej as a hard-nosed politician, a diplomat, but also an author who has repeatedly visited the tortured decades of India's tryst with colonialism. Obviously, a lot of people, Navtej, want to see in this a kind of end of empire moment. But there are others who point to the records of a Suella Braverman, a Priti Patel, to make the point that Indian links or an Indian heritage alone is not enough to say that you'll be more progressive or more open when it comes to your politics. How do you see this moment, Navtej?
Well, thank you, Barkha, and great to be here with such a distinguished group of friends. I think that was a very valid point you make, and not to take away anything at all from Rishi Sunak's rise and his achievement. I think it's it's at one moment, at one level, it is what I would call a Lagaan moment. That here is the empire really striking back, to use a cliche much overused, and the fact that things have come around full circle and all that. I think it's good to feel that way. It's good to indulge ourselves in that feeling for a while. But while we celebrate, I think we should celebrate with realism. And the fact is that Mr. Sunak is a Prime Minister of Britain, and he, as he rightly should, is there to protect the best interests of the country that he is Prime Minister of. So we should not load him or any other person of color or Indian origin who rises to the top with expectations that are only likely to be disappointed. So I think at one level we can celebrate, we can mark the rise of multi-diversity, multi-faith, the United Kingdom. We can mark the rise of Indian origin people working hard and doing well, a great achievement for the Indian community abroad and for India as a whole. But I think they are there in a particular role and have particular responsibilities and commitments. So if they, as they might take positions which are different from our ideal positions as the government of India or India, then we should take it in our stride also.
Yeah, and I think, as I said, the reality check has come from those who have served in government previously with links back to India. You're seeing some of those headlines on our screen right now. Ed, let me take this to you. The interesting thing I read on your Twitter timeline was that you said that this is not as dramatic as it looks from our perch in India to many people in the UK. And you said the class fault line was not being spoken enough of. We were stressing too much on Rishi being brown, of Indian heritage, and all the rest of that, but not looking at his enormous wealth, which of course a lot of headlines today have said he and his wife have a combined wealth as greater than that of the royal family. And there's a lot of pushback against him for that as well. A lot of in some quarters of the Tory base itself dislike, and I saw some of the tabloids sort of making that point today. Ed, go ahead.
So I was partly reacting to a lot of my American friends and colleagues here in Washington and beyond saying that this is an Obama moment for Britain. And I think whilst I agree with what everybody has said, that this is a really important watershed in terms of the evolution of a multi-ethnic Britain, and it's something to be celebrated, that you can't really compare it to an Obama moment for a number of reasons. One is that he hasn't been elected by the public. This was an internal Conservative Party contest, so that mandate isn't there. But two, because I think the more significant sort of Achilles heel he's going to face politically is not the color of his skin, it's the sort of plutocratic flavor to his background. He went to Winchester, a very posh boarding school, Oxford, Goldman Sachs. Ends up at Stanford, as obviously married Akshata Murthy and is now worth more than the king, apparently. So this he will be vulnerable in a period of austerity, which he's going to be presiding over and implementing, to attacks, to class attacks, first and foremost. If, however, he starts getting into immigration reform, which I believe he should encourage. Britain has labor shortages. It has productivity stagnation. It needs more immigration, including from countries like India. If he gets into that, then he will be vulnerable to attacks from the right and to racist attacks. So he's not got an easy job. Nobody would want to inherit the prime ministership at this time with this.
Except for Boris Johnson, who would have been quite happy to come back had he really had 100+ MPs, huh?
Yeah, and I used a rather unfortunate analogy of a dog going back to its vomit, which I apologize for. I know you can't unsee that, but the Tory party, didn't sufficiently agree with Boris's desire to return. But Sunak is, the level-headed person. He's fiscally, sane. He's not going to tank the pound. He's going to try and stabilize things. And that's quite a noble role to perform at this time. There's been a lot of unforced errors in British governance by the Conservative Party. And he's got to try and clean up that mess. But it's not going to be, a glorious time to be Prime Minister. He's not going to be popular. There's going to be a lot of spending stringency. And that's naturally going to produce class politics and class resentment.
And I think the important point is that no matter which way he turns, he's going to get attacked by one or the other side. So it is really a tough spot to be in. Pranav, unlike Lord Karan Bilimoria here, who came from India and then made it upwards, you were born in Britain. And therefore, the way you look at this might be very different. I remember you were rooting for Rishi Sunak the first time around as well. He didn't make it then. You've written a whole book on the rise of Sunak. For you as a younger person today, what does this moment actually mean? And what's the kind of prime minister you expect him to be? Give me a second, Pranav. You need to unmute yourself at your end, Pranav. Yeah.
I think this is the most significant political moment of my life, at least the past 15 years since I've been a paid up member of the Conservative Party. 15 years ago, I used to go to the Conservative Party and they would deliberately put me on the front row to show that there was diversity in the conference room. And 15 years later, the person actually at the lectern doing the keynote speech is somebody of my colour. I think that this is very much the British dream. People talk about the American dream, but this is the British dream coming to light. This is somebody who, whatever his wealth, he's either made it or married into it. He hasn't always been born into huge amounts of wealth, and he has worked incredibly hard to get to where he's got to. And I think it's a real inspiration, and it's a story of aspiration for the millennials, the Asian millennials in this country, who may feel that there are glass ceilings in different organizations. And Rishi Sunak has gone and smashed every single one of them. And it is a moment, in my mind, I'm incredibly proud of what we've seen. Yes, it's only going to probably go downhill from here. This is probably the most popular he's going to be. But let's not, I don't want to take anything away from this moment right now. Yes, there's important decisions to be made. But, this is a guy who doesn't shy away from his Indianness. He doesn't shy away from his religious beliefs. And, there are many, many politicians in Parliament who would try and hide the fact that they've got a certain background or they've got a certain religious faith. And this is somebody who consistently has been proud of it. And I think there's something to be said about that.
Yeah, let me bring in Lord Karan Bilimoria at this point. It's, I'd be curious to understand, one, the generational difference, if there is one. Secondly, the point you made about, the fact that you had to start from scratch, Karan, when you founded the now enormously successful Cobra beer. It wasn't that simple. The role of wealth, the fact that wealth can, of course, be an enormous vehicle of influence, but it's also something that can be used against you in public life. Again and again, Rishi Sunak's wealth is used for him as a kind of political disqualification in a lot of the commentary, right? How do you see that, especially from the perch of somebody who literally came as the son of, from a military Fauji background in India, from Hyderabad, and starts from zero? How do you see the story of Rishi Sunak and the place of wealth in his political narrative?
This is, as Pranav just said, this is very much and I've said this, expressed in the same way, the British dream. Everyone talks about the American dream, it's the British dream. And then that dream is all about aspiration and opportunity. So if you have the opportunity to get to the very top, that creates aspiration, which creates achievement, which creates inspiration, which in turn creates aspiration. So it becomes a virtuous circle. And here you've got the extreme example of it. Now, Rishi Sunak didn't start with wealth. His father was a doctor and his mother was a pharmacist. To my knowledge, he got a scholarship to Winchester. He had to work his way through. He did well. He became head boy. He studied hard. He went to Oxford. He did well there. He went to Stanford. He worked at financial institutions. So he's worked his way and achieved this through sheer meritocracy. And I think as long as you give people that opportunity, then if they're wealthy, it should not matter. If somebody is wealthy, as long as they're doing the right thing, as long as they're putting back in the community, as long as they're humble as human beings and they're grounded, that's what matters. If somebody is a flamboyant, wealthy person, of course that's not going to work. But Rishi's not that sort of person. He was Chancellor of the Exchequer, Finance Minister for 2 years while I was leading British Industries, President of the Confederate British Industry. I've worked regularly with him. I've seen him firsthand, and he's a really hard worker. He listens. He's bright. And together we 400 billion pounds to save jobs, save the economy, the furlough scheme, the government guaranteed loans, all that was done working collaboratively with business, led by Rishi. So I've seen it firsthand. He's done this through his ability and hard work.
Navtej, can we see this the other way around? These are British citizens, Karan, Geeta, Ed, and Pranav today looking at their politics. Now let's look at this as Indians. There are two kinds of reactions. One, absolutely, there's a kind of Sada Munda moment. Sunak traces his roots back to Gujranwala originally, then Africa, and then to the United Kingdom. But we're all sort of, the WhatsApp Desi groups are exploding and claiming this young man as our own. On the other hand, there are health warnings. Hey, look what happened with Kamala Harris. That's how she was pitched. It doesn't necessarily mean anything for us. Given our tortured past, and it is a tortured past, colonialism has shaped generations that didn't even experience it themselves. Even today, we debate the place of English. We say, give the Kohinoor back. We talk about Jallianwala Bagh. You've written a whole book on it. Seeing this as an Indian, how do you see it?
Well, again, this is Barkha. This is what I tried to say in my early intervention, is to say it's basically, at an emotional level, yes. And we can allow ourselves this indulgence, that Sada Munda moment. And, he's one of us who's right there. And there's the Diwali in Downing Street, which is a very good emotion to have. But let's not mix it up with actual government relationships and policies. If he is good, he will be a British Prime Minister. And we must, while taking pride that there is an Indian origin person in 10 Downing Street, we should also recognize, we should also change with the changing world. We also have to, expect that if the Indian diaspora spreads and they continue to do well, they will be in positions where they will have loyalties to other countries also. So that is why I say, let us not set ourselves up for disappointment. I'm not saying that he will disappoint us, but there will be policy issues. There, for instance, with Braverman, you had the issue of migrant Indians. You may have problems as you go into the FTA negotiations, on which they will take a different positions. Otherwise, this would have all been done. So we also have to look at it with a certain maturity, that people of Indian origin will rise, but then they are citizens of another country. They are political representatives of another country. They are playing the politics of that country, and they will have to, for their own success, have to balance things according to that country's policies. Yes, India will always have a special position in their hearts, hopefully. Indian festivals will have a position in their heart. Indian emotions will be there. And to that extent, it's a heartwarming moment. But let's not get carried away. We saw it with Kamala Harris, and I don't want to, set ourselves up for any more disappointments.
Yeah. Let me bring in Geeta first, and then Ed, on what might be the toughest moment. I mean, with after all the memes about 10 Downing Street sort of becoming this sort of Airbnb option, do you think Rishi Sunak has staying power? Does he have his party behind behind him? Will Boris Johnson's camp saw him as a traitor? Is that in the past, or is it too early to say?
It is early to say, and just to pick up on sort of the split loyalties. I remember my children were slightly astonished when we find out that Rishi Sunak supports England at cricket rather than India, which they thought was the height of disloyalty, because my children very firmly support India, despite having an English father.
Yeah, I was going to ask Navtej that the mixed emotions on everything is fine, but what do you do when the cricket is played?
So and I think he's even got the dog, which obviously is the essential English accessory here. But in terms of his political fortunes, it's been very interesting. In the last hour, we've just seen Rishi Sunak, being driven to Buckingham Palace, and then entering Downing Street without his wife actually by his side. Whether that's because he's aware of the political difficulties of her non-domiciled status, whether he wants to just protect his family's privacy, and he's saying that from the get-go. Look, it's me, and I'm businesslike, and leave my family out of it. He obviously is in a very difficult position. He has not been elected by the Conservative membership. He certainly has not been elected by the British public. The opposition parties here are saying he has got no mandate from the public, and that there should be a general election, because to change Prime Minister twice without going to the voters is fundamentally unfair. Now, technically, of course, he's allowed to stay in office, but of course, he's going to be under pressure to deliver quickly. It does seem that, market-wise, he will, be focused on bringing stability and maintaining stability. The question then is going to be how difficult the choices are in front of him. And it was very interesting to hear him use the word compassion, and that is because perhaps he is aware that we are all braced for spending cuts in public services and potentially tax rises. And during furlough, I was similarly struck by the fact that he kept announcing these huge amounts of public spending, but would always end his statement by saying, I'm fundamentally in favour of low taxes. I'm a low tax conservative. So he was sort of saying one thing but doing the other. And I just wonder, when he says he's compassionate, he's saying that because he knows he's about to enter a very, very difficult few months. And therefore, he will have to prove himself, I think, fairly quickly. And maintaining unity within the Conservatives is going to be a big challenge too.
I know Navtej has to hop off just a couple of minutes before we complete this program. So Navtej, 30-seconder, just a thought you'd like to leave us with, and then Ed and Pranav. Navtej?
I think it's a great moment, and it's a great moment for India-UK relations. So let's get going and put things back on track, which have been sort of upset because of the instability that has been prevailing in the political system here. And this is, I think, what the Prime Minister of India sort of implied in his tweet. There is a big roadmap for India-UK relations. And while there is clearly foreign policy is not going to be primary on Prime Minister Sunak's plate, because he has tremendous things to do at home. But let's not forget sight of that, and let's bring it back to the India-UK story without expecting sudden great concessions.
All right, Navtej, thank you. Ed, let me bring you in now. You said that thanks, Navtej. You were responding to, your American friends who were calling it an Obama moment. But the romanticism aside, what is this moment for somebody like you who has also personal India connections, who spent many years here? Colonialism is a very complicated and long shadow over this relationship, and it does come into everything, and that's why Lagaan did as well as it did. And there is that satisfaction, even if it's misplaced, to say, oh, here's our guy at Downing Street. But if you had to step out beyond the romance of this initial moment, what do you expect will happen? Do you think he'll last his 2 years? Do you think there'll be calls for general elections? Do you think his legitimacy will be challenged on the grounds that he's not elected?
Well, I think I can confidently predict his prime ministership will last longer than Liz Truss's.
I'm just laughing because, can you imagine anything being shorter than that?
That would not be auspicious, and that would be bad news for everybody, not just the Conservative Party, because it would mean that the instability that is really hitting Britain's balance sheet has got worse. And I don't expect that to happen. I think he's considerably more competent and responsible and capable than his two predecessors, Liz Truss and Boris Johnson. Boris Johnson is incredibly lazy, and was on a 2-week holiday in the Dominican Republic whilst Parliament was sitting at the point, when it was at its maximum drama, and flew back with a sort of half-hearted attempt to fight for the leadership. Liz Truss, it still shocks me, and I think many people, that she actually became Prime Minister, given her lack of credentials, but determination has a way. Rishi Sunak has the advantage. I think follow the first rule of jobs is always follow an underperformer, and he's following 2 underperformers, well, arguably 4, in fact, and starting with low expectations. And this is a good springboard for doing better than people expect you to do. What I though would emphasize very strongly is what a horrible set of choices and trade-offs he faces as he tries to stabilize the British economy. As Geeta pointed out, we're going to see fiscal tightening. That's what's required for monetary policy, not to be more extreme than we'd want it to be. We don't want interest rates to double. We want them to go up by a little bit. And therefore, the government has to play its fiscal part. And that means tax rises. That does mean spending cuts. And neither of those 2 actions are associated with popular prime ministers. It would be the responsible thing to do, however, if he fails and we see, another short prime ministership, which I'm not expecting, then we will have a general election. And then, irony of ironies, we will get a Labour Party which has only ever had white male leaders. Which you'd expect it, I guess, kind of to be the other way around, but you will get a white male Labour Prime Minister after having had, well, what have we had? Three women Conservative Prime Ministers, now the first ethnic minority Jewish Conservative Prime Minister in the 19th century. There are lots of ironies in this story, which are hard to summarize in one answer, Barkha.
Well, it's kind of similar to the left in India, that actually has not such great representation for women in its highest decision-making bodies. So there's a lot of gap between stated politics and actual execution. So that's an interesting thing to point out. Pranav, you said this was the most important sort of dramatic moment in your sort of adult life. Your book on Rishi, the rise of Rishi, what's it actually? Tell us something we don't know about him. Tell us something that hasn't been reported yet.
Well, one thing that people don't always talk about is his humility and his attention to detail. When he first got elected into a very rural part of the country, I think this was mentioned on your show once before, but I will mention it again. He really wanted to understand the work of the farmers. There's a huge farming community in his constituency. And the way he did that was waking up early and, actually going onto the farms and, milking the cows and really getting his hands dirty. And I think that really does summarize the personality of Rishi Sunak. I think he's somebody who carries a lot of humility. Yes, he has wealth, but I
was just going to say, you must have seen those old videos from his sort of salad days, which spoke about him having only sort of, well-heeled friends. I'm sure you've seen that video. Where does that sit with the sort of guy of the grassroots, hobnobbing with the farmers?
Well, I think if you look hard enough, you can find a video on most things in this. Information is everywhere. But from my own personal dealings, I found him to be, somebody with great humility, like Lord Bilimoria said. You can have all the money in the world. It's actually how you portray yourself and how you come across. He's a geek, quite frankly, in the most positive sense. He loves attention to detail, which is far more than many of the other prime ministers we've had. I think he's also he takes real advice. I think on every decision he'll go to at least between 2 to 5 advisors. So he's not just going to be shooting from the hip. So I think there is some real promise here. But once we get over the hype that we currently have, It is going to be about getting down to business. And, you know, I think he's got a hugely difficult task. He came in over the summer as the underdog. He still is the underdog when you compare him against Keir Starmer. Keir Starmer could probably still beat him in a general election if it took place tomorrow. So a lot of work to be done. But I think we've got some real heavy hitters in the cabinet now. Hopefully, are going to make the cabinet this afternoon, and will get us out, or at least try and get us out of the mess we've been in over the past few weeks.
Yep, mess is an understatement. I know you all have a tight sked. Karan, Bilimoria, if you would like a quick last word, what's the toughest thing? Ed has already pointed out, as is Geeta, as is Pranav, everybody, that, you know, fiscal control is going to be the tightrope to walk. And especially given his personal wealth and the non-dom sort of controversy with his wife, Akshita Murthy, anything he does could be labeled as here's the rich guy not understanding what the poor or the poorer citizens of England are going through. So just a last word to you, Karan.
Well, let me put it this way. When Liz Truss became Prime Minister on the 6th of September, she was in a hurry. Only 2 years to go before an election. Get in growth, get investment, revive the economy. And then sadly, Her Majesty the Queen died. And that period from the 8th of September to the 19th of the funeral, those 10, 11 days, the whole world looked at the United Kingdom with love and admiration because of this lady who'd been Queen for 70 years. The respect for this country was just phenomenal. And then it all came crashing down on the 23rd of September when we had that mini budget. And quite frankly, since then, it has hurt me so much that we became the laughing stock of the world. So here's the opportunity for Rishi Sunak, a serious individual who understands business, who understands finance, who's been finance minister, to now lead this country, to get his party together, to get a cabinet of the best talents of his party, not best friends, but best talents, and to get this country on a steady path, regaining respect with the business community, with the finance community, with the global community, with all the challenges we've got. We've got a recession looming. We've got a cost of living crisis. We've got an energy crisis. We've got the Ukraine war. There's so many issues. We've got a free trade deal with India that we've got to finalize. There's lots to be done. He's got to hit the ground running, and I'm sure he will do it.
And in the meantime, of course, for anyone who has a Desi connection, the humor coming out of both the diaspora and this part of the country is a delight, including how Type A moms and dads are now going to be telling their children, if you work hard enough, you can be the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. So get to that math class and get to that ballet class and get to that Bharatnatyam class. Leaving it there, Pranav, Geeta, Karan, Ed, and before that, Navtej. Always a pleasure. And to our audience, thanks for watching. See you tomorrow. It's great to see you here. Thank you for watching our work. If you haven't subscribed yet, don't forget to click the bell icon and subscribe to Mojo Story and support independent, robust journalism.